Well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us. I'm Robb Emmett, and I'm a video director, editor, and the owner of a video production company called Win-Win Productions. Today, I'm producing this webinar with some business colleagues of mine who are specialists in different areas, and they're going to discuss some ideas that are important for non-for-profit organizations to understand. How does a nonprofit come back successfully from a historic pandemic and economic shutdown? That's the overarching theme of this webinar series, and today's webinar is about partnerships and mergers. What kinds of questions do those overseeing a non-for-profit need to ask now about its purpose and activities, and how can they build creative partnerships to help it survive? We have a brief introduction about this topic from our featured panelist, Bill Hassett, and then the panelists will discuss. We're not taking live questions in these webinars. However, I will pass on your questions to the panelists if you have them, and they'll get back to you by email. So if you have a question, please email it to me at my address, which I'll give to you at the end. Right now, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, Jennifer Denil is the owner of JD Financial Associates. She is a certified public accountant who provides fractional financial controller services to closely held businesses. Jennifer assists her clients with understanding cash flows, increasing profitability, and identifying cost savings from operational efficiencies. Her clients benefit from her 30 years of financial experience without the cost commitment of a full-time employee. Most recently, she has assisted many companies of varying sizes with navigating the CARES Act funding opportunities. Next, Mary Erlain is the founder of Peak Development Strategies. She believes an organization's foundation is their people, the employees, management, and owners. She is a published author of business books. Her most recent books address the opportunities and challenges of the multi-generational workforce. Generational diversity is a root cause of many of the problems in business today that affect growth, productivity, and profitability. As Mary says, the constraints of doing business ease due to the pandemic, don't forget your people. She believes that a culture needs to be rebuilt in order for a business to sustain itself going forward. And lastly, our featured panelist today is Bill Hassett. Bill and .org Services provide strategy and revenue thinking and action for nonprofits across the Chicagoland area. Bill uses his many years of accounting, finance, and nonprofit board experience to help nonprofit leaders think through their ideas about strategy, their why us. He also challenges them to think about how they carry out their mission. The size of the nonprofits he serves ranges from the startup idea recently invented around a kitchen table to the third-generation agency that needs to prepare for new challenges. He even works with the final stage agency that has the courage to merge or partner when it can't achieve success on its own. Bill was a partner in a CPA firm for many years and has served on more than a dozen nonprofit boards in roles that included all the board officer positions, including board chair. He welcomes the chance to talk nonprofit with people interested in accomplishing community helping action. Today's topic is partnerships and mergers. We'll start with a brief overview of the topic from Bill, then open it up for the whole panel to discuss and wrap it up in about half an hour. Let's begin. Bill, what are some of the things non-for-profits are doing to pivot during these challenging times?
Yeah. Thank you, Rob. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about this. We're about 10 or 11 weeks into a crisis that has upended every nonprofit's idea of what it is and how it delivers its service, its content to the people it serves. During these times, financial challenges, personnel challenges, place of business challenges have all hit nonprofits and the people that support them, the people that work for them, the people who have oversight in board functions and who volunteer for them in many ways. And so in our half hour today, I'd like to survey a few aspects of this, just a brief statement of what those challenges are, what some of the strategies are that agencies are using right now as they go through it, where are the boards of these organizations involved in these activities, and then what is going to happen next. So what are the positioning activities that nonprofits can use now to make sure they're as ready as possible for, as we might call it, re-entry. And then longer term, what has all of this done to what we assumed was the hard and fast assumptions about what our purpose was, what our activities have to be. So I'm going to just start off with the problems. Probably don't need to repeat this to much of this audience, but the 4 or 5 things that jump to mind right away are reduced donations, increased unemployment, and diversion of donating resources to very specific COVID-related activities, perhaps medical research, perhaps the very specific organizations that someone supports in the whole year. Not holding events and galas, which in many cases are major fundraising, major revenue generators for organizations that, because of all the regulations and restrictions, can't be done at this time. Extra costs to either relocate your staff to their homes or to remote facilities, or for people that are frontline serving, the additional PPE and related costs to navigate the contact and to be able to deliver service, continue to deliver service in a safe fashion for everyone. So those are maybe the financial consequences. Let's also think of the time consequences. There's so much more time to manage a remote workforce. The leadership not only has to give direction and hear feedback, but really has to spend time with their personnel to make sure they're being productive, but also to connect with them, to understand how they're doing working by themselves when the rest of their work lives have been in places where they have colleagues. What is the impact of productivity and just a personal touch for people that are doing that? For messaging. So we don't want to go dark in this period of time. We don't want to fall off the radar screen of all of our donors, colleagues, volunteers, etc. But that all takes time to create and deliver that messaging. And then the impact of spending a lot of time doing modeling, making PPP loan applications, listening to webinars on the almost daily changes on how to comply with the PPP loan activities, and all of the other things that are cost of time. And the time that's being spent on these things is not being spent on growing your donor base, on finding new supporters, volunteers, and managing your programs. So that's kind of a brief statement of what the problems are. Next question, what are agencies doing? What are the strategies that they're doing just to survive? So besides making the PPP loan application and attending to how the money's spent, many organizations' leadership are having weekly or more frequent check-ins as an entire group, and then with their direct reports on a more frequent basis to address the productivity things I said before, to retain as much as possible that sense of common purpose and we're all in this together, to have a little bit of fun in an otherwise challenging day. Some of our employees are spending 8 or 10 hours with their work over and above trying to educate their children and dealing with personal things that come up just in the course of being home all day. So all of this indicates that part of responding to this is all the financial things, all of the messaging things, but also dealing with your staff as a group. And so having an HR strategy at this time has become particularly important to every organization. Having that strategy means how are we connecting with our people? How are we dealing with whether we are adequately staffed? What do we have to do to think about how they work, how productive they are? And all of those are just a few of the considerations in maintaining our workforce at this time.
So Bill, let me jump in. What you just described almost for me sounded like the pandemic was kind of the pebble that hit the windshield that then started the little spider fractures that eventually just traveled across the windshield. And in order to do that, to deal with all of those, it can be pretty overwhelming. And you began talking about the HR piece. And clearly, I think HR has been fractured in many, many ways. First off, you took a group of people, typically in nonprofits, you generally have that nucleus of staff that become quite cohesive and dependent, and you took them away from each other. And the whole compliance side to even just managing flows of information, I think a social service agency still need to operate under HIPAA, but now we're doing this via personal computer. And never mind the employment law piece, but could you kind of speak to some of the conversations you're having on that HR front?
Sure. I think there's two that I can think of most immediately. One is that people may have had a very clear understanding of what their role was in an organization and who they reported to and what good performance looked like. In an environment where there's no way to walk down a hallway and have a conversation with someone to clear up a misunderstanding or to make sure that someone's doing the kind of work that's expected of them, the challenge is to figure out workarounds to how do I know that I'm doing what I should be doing? How do I know that I'm being productive? How do I know that my leader is viewing me as being a contributing member of the organization? Paired with, maybe I'm being called upon right now to do something that I really don't think of as my job. Maybe I either have to pivot to work on a different activity that I'm not used to. Maybe I'm calling my donors, my volunteers, my people that I serve, in reaching out to them in ways that I haven't had to do before. So those are a couple of things that I think are challenges that the employee is facing now in this remote environment, also paired with whatever their home environment is like. How many distractions do they have with, let's say, younger children trying to be amused, let's say, to stay on task with school things? What is just going to shop is a lot longer than it used to be. So just keeping the household running and at the same time trying to balance workflow is a huge challenge right now. To say nothing of, there are certainly legal considerations now as people have to figure out a strategy of how am I going to staff what I do in the future with the same, with fewer, with more people? Is it going to be a different workforce? And if I have to make painful decisions about either furloughs or layoffs, how do I do that and respect the legal requirements that I may not be firsthand with?
Mm-hmm.
Bill, what would be some red flags? I'm sorry, what would be some red flags that would come up that would indicate that you really need some legal advice?
Right. And we want to be clear to our audience that none of us is an attorney, but just in general, when you are modifying someone's compensation, when you're modifying someone's number of hours that they work, if they were to go from full-time to less than full-time, if you're significantly modifying their job responsibilities or their reporting lines, and certainly if you are thinking about terminating them, respecting all of the legal requirements about how that's done is exactly the kind of things that should immediately raise a bell. I need to have professional counsel here.
It almost sounds counterintuitive in that people are working remotely and not in person, and yet communication is even more important and needs to be happening more frequently.
Absolutely. I think one of them is the vehicles for communication. When I'm not face-to-face with you, I don't completely understand the messaging you might be delivering in ways that are not verbal, just as an example. If I'm one of 25 squares on a screen, I'm not necessarily getting your attention onto what I'm trying to say. And I may have only one occasion in a company-wide Zoom meeting. I may have a 20-second opportunity to say something, and that may be my whole contribution. So I may have a lot more on my mind than I'm going to be able to express in 20 seconds. So you're absolutely right that communication, it's new strategies, it's new ways of doing things, and not everyone's immediately comfortable with it. There's going to be hiccups in the course of doing that. Mm-hmm. We've been talking about what organizations are doing right now for strategies. I want to mention one other one. Obviously, the finances is a critical piece. Understanding that the budget you produced long ago is, we're now into month 6. What does that budget look like? All of those assumptions that went into that budget many of them have been challenged, if not outright made obsolete. And so being on top of what your numbers look like, not only now, but in the near short-term future, is become totally critical to any organization's survival.
So, Bill, are you seeing entities almost starting from scratch with their budgeting and walking away from whatever budget plans they had at the beginning of this calendar year and just redoing budgets now for the next 6 months? Are they still going 12 months out? Are they doing shorter periods? What kind of trends are you seeing, or what would be your recommendations?
Right. I would say that what I'm seeing is that kind of breaking the rest of this year into two pieces. There's the re-emergent piece, which hopefully is going to start this month. There are some additional costs to preparing the workplace for distancing, to bringing some, but perhaps not all, of the workforce back, to perhaps relocating some of the workforce so that we can take advantage. Maybe we're underutilizing some space, and now with the distancing, we can take better advantage of that space. So I think there's a lot of one-time costs that are going to be needed in order to get to reentry. And then beyond reentry, as we get through the rest of the year, it's a little bit different. Maybe the costs kind of subside a little bit, but now you look at the top line. What can we assume about revenue and government grants? Some will be positioned to be in better condition because the government's going to be supporting their activity with more contracts. On the other hand, our support base, our donor base, and our volunteer base may be tapped out. Either has already donated to a lot of COVID-related donations and doesn't really have the resources left, maybe doesn't have a job anymore to support the organizations they like, or for the volunteers, maybe at an age where their physical safety takes precedence over their ability to volunteer for you. So I'd say I'm kind of looking at the rest of this year in two phases and absolutely modeling what those two phases looks like so that people can have an understanding. Here's the situation we're in. In some cases, it will make people feel better. It's not maybe in their case a desperate situation. In others, it will be clear that there are hard decisions that can't be put off.
So as a board member, what I'm hearing from the HR perspective, the financial perspective, the donor perspective, what does the board meetings look like? Usually boards are oftentimes being very visionary. Now it doesn't look like vision is not so far years down the road, but more days, weeks, months. So how has the board had to pivot during this time?
Sure. Well, there's not one size fits all answer to that in terms of boards. There are many varieties of involvement or stepped back ways that boards operate. But in general, the boards obviously have to be concerned about the finances and making sure that the blocking and tackling aspects of just understanding what the cash flows are and how they've changed is one critical step that boards are doing right now. Another will be to selectively reach out to the donor base, especially the donors who are support at higher levels, to make sure they understand where the organization's headed and what is going to be the same and what's going to be different going forward, to be a support system for the executive team, to let them know that the board has confidence in them, but at the same time to say, we may have to challenge you on things that you don't want to do. There may be, if it's staff reductions, if it's new configurations at work, if it's the mix of activities or lines of business that we're used to that we just don't have the resources to fully support anymore. So somewhere in all of those things, Mary, both supporter, challenger, supporter, challenger, and asking the right questions, but probably are having to take a greater level of involvement. If they're used to being more hands-off and just looking at monthly reports, that really is not going to work in the near term where we find ourselves right now. The challenge that may present, though, is that the board creeps into areas that they are not used to being seen before. And so there certainly can be opportunities, as Jennifer brought up, the whole messaging and communication. That's got to be done in a common understanding of we want the organization to survive past this. And so my extra oversight as a board member is not meant to say you're not doing your job, executive team, but it's really to make sure they're fulfilling their diligence requirements and that they can contribute whatever they can contribute to the future of the organization.
I think that highlights the need for working with somebody like you, because in essence, having that third party helping them understand the impact of the choices that they make, such as getting involved enough without getting over involved. As a board, you know, they're kind of sitting in a bubble. You're on the outside looking in. I could see where you could be a huge guide to that process. So ultimately, their best efforts don't become a negative impact.
Yeah, I agree. I think that many board members who may have more of a business background, the strategies they might impose in a for-profit organization are not always the same as the ones that make the most sense for a nonprofit organization. And so the board member who's used to being in business would say, here's the things that we need to do, boom, boom, boom. And there's times when that's right, and there's times when they have to be the ones that go and push. But there's other times when the runway's a little bit longer and those reaction business strategies just don't make sense for an organization that's got to be around a long time and can't readily change as much as a for-profit business always can.
Bill, is that somewhat due to the fact that you're dealing with volunteers frequently on the the person who is on the front lines of what the organization does is a volunteer? Is that why non-for-profits tend to sometimes run a little differently than a business and can't have some of the standards?
Sure. For nonprofits that don't produce a product, a lot of both the revenue and the services is based on people making a decision to do things that aren't always in their best interest, to part with their financial resources when they could spend their money personally, or to give of their time to help others where they could use that time in ways that benefit them better. So all of it is based on human resources, let's say financial resources, that don't come because of a value transfer. There's not a product that I receive or service I receive and I acknowledge I need to pay for it. It's voluntary. It's here's what I see you can do to support a change I want. And so I'm going to give you these resources. But yeah, there's very much difference in the approach, and the presence of volunteers and the fact that it's donor supported doesn't create the same environment. Let me move now to kind of the topic has been partnerships and mergers. And so we've kind of set the table for why the world is going to be different than it was before. And I'm going to propose to the audience that one thing that the organization really needs to do is to look at all of the activities that they're doing, both from a financial commitment and a time commitment, to see which of those things, as painful as it might be, either need to be stopped or need to be, as I would use the term, quieted, where an activity that we've gotten donor support for in the past, that donor support is just not going to be available right now. And so we may have to make the hard decision that our strategy is very much in doing this activity, but right now is not the right time to be doing it. And then that can be addressed in a number of different ways. So after we've used our professional resources to get a good handle on the cost of each of our activities, both human, time, and financial, to then take the information we've gotten from that, and then we don't apply a one-size-fits-all strategy to each of those activities. There may be some activities that are running as well or better after virus time as they were before, and we don't really need to tinker with them too much. There may be other activities that we look at and say, well, they're about break even right now, and so we don't really want to touch them, but we don't want to invest a lot of extra time to build resources for them because they're an important activity, but they're not going to produce additional resources to the organization. Then there's that other category of activities, and I'd use the word activities here to mean not only the programs that we support, but the way we run the back office, the administrative functions. And then there's a range of strategies that we can bring to this. And so some of the ones that I would propose are, first of all, and this would be primarily for the administrative tasks, are we doing them efficiently based on staffing them ourselves, or do we need to take a look at what other full-time resources there are out there that could take it on for us in a much cheaper, or at least a somewhat cheaper cost basis, not only for the sheer cost of it, but for the fact that additional expertise can lead to a lot less time investment.
Is this where you might see an organization evaluating a program and identifying other similar organizations that provide complementary programs or services and thinking about merging to synergize the two organizations in effect? Yes.
So, right, I think another one of the strategies besides what's sometimes called outsourcing is to look at our activity and say, we're losing money at this. Do we have peer organizations out there that also do this service? And perhaps they just know how to do it better. Maybe it's their A program and it's our C program. And so we don't want to stop doing it, but we want to decrease the loss we're experiencing from it. Can we partner with another organization to look at what we do, what they do? If we're serving approximately the same base of clients, can we figure out a way that the work we want to continue doing but can't do profitably can be done by a partner peer organization? So very much creating partnerships around the way mission is accomplished, certainly for some amount of those programs, is absolutely a strategy that organizations have. Yeah.
So one strategy might be actually legally merging with another organization to form a new merged entity, or I think you just described where the two organizations maybe share some shared costs, like personnel work part-time for one organization and part-time for another organization, maybe forming a partnership where they each contribute to pay for common personnel costs that they then share. Is that kind of what you're describing then?
Right. Those are a lot of great specific ideas on how these partnerships. I think I really want to have the audience take away that this is not an all or nothing proposition. So maybe a merger is the most extreme, but even a merger done with parts of the business. Briefly, a merger means that literally two organizations come together and only one is left after they come together. There's a whole host of issues around the executive team, the boards, how the donors feel about it. But it may be that there's just one of our programs that makes sense to do the merger on. So maybe we take everything we did, we've gone through this analysis and said, here's the things we're making money on, here's the things that are break-even-ish, here's the things we're losing money on. Within those losing money ons, maybe we're making a one-time investment, and this is where the future is. Or maybe they used to be our main thing, and they're now kind of a secondary thing. And we see our peer organization over there who does it all day long and just really knows how to do it. And the merger might be not our whole nonprofit, but this piece of our activity may be merged onto another organization.
I could see where if you did that, how does that work with the people? And how, in essence, what you're doing is you could end up losing people. You could have that organization acquire that talent, but you're changing the culture and you're changing the finance, and it's impacting pretty much every area of the organization because you're taking a piece of the puzzle out of it and it's an incomplete puzzle. So again, encouraging the need, don't do this by yourself. It may seem simple to do, but it's not easy to do, because at the end of the day, there's a lot at stake beyond just the program and the money. You know, you've got an organizational culture to
Very
think
much.
about, and having somebody shepherd that process with you.
Mhm. Yeah, generally the direct program people that actually provide service usually would transition over to whatever the new structure looks like.
Mhm.
It's that leadership component where maybe some of that leadership has to move over to existing programs that are going to be retained and are going to go forward. It does offer a lot of opportunity to kind of reconfigure the organization, where some people may be orphans because their activity moved elsewhere, that they may have new skill sets and may be a great learning for them to be able to
Right.
move over to the primary program. So it's not all negative. There are certainly opportunities that come out of this, very much so.
Absolutely.
But yes, you're 100% right that it's a different culture. And it's a different culture right now, in honesty, with everybody working remote. That's not the way when most people were interviewed. They weren't interviewed on the basis of working remotely by themselves. And so culture's already changed and has got to be dealt with. But to layer on an organizational merger, partnership, whatever it is, certainly magnifies the need to understand that. I think we're kind of near the end of our time, so I just wanted to wrap up with the things we've covered today. Our basic premise is that there's been so much change going on in organizations and nonprofits these days in all aspects: staffing, finances, volunteer, executive team. And so it's a real call to action right now. What that action is got to be based on sound financial information. So looking at your different activities in your administrative functions is kind of the first step to understand them. And then collaborating with your professionals, with your board, and with your executive teams to look at what our options are and what are the many ways that we can accomplish the same thing by working differently, by partnering, by merging, by involving people as outsourced providers that we didn't think of before. But looking at all of those activities and saying, with this new opportunity, with the expectation, at least for a while, our resources are going to be less, how do we keep the most important activities that we're doing and not necessarily sacrifice the ones that aren't the most important, but to figure out new ways of accomplishing our mission with different ways of doing business.
Good. Yeah, we are at the end of our time today. So I just wanted to, thanks for that wrap up, Bill. I appreciate that. Appreciate the information and the panel today. So we are out of time. I'm just going to let you all know about our next webinar. We'll feature Mary talking about the culture, rebuilding culture after the shutdown. Don't forget your people. And we will discuss how to rebuild an organizational culture. You may have staff that's been working from home for a long time. They may need to continue to work from home for a while. How do you get your team back together with all that's happening in the world right now? So that will be Mary's discussion. We'll have a panel with that as well. Lastly, if you have any questions about creating video content during the shutdown to keep in touch with clients or donors, creating video to promote your organization on social media, or if you'd like help facilitating webinars like this one, please contact me and we can talk more. Also, you can take a look at my website for some samples of my work. You see my email there as well. If you have questions for today's panel, you can email those to me. I'll pass those on and they'd be happy to talk with you further about your specific situations. So thanks for joining us today. I'm Robb Emmett with Win-Win Productions, and we hope you're well, and we hope you'll be able to work through these very interesting times. So feel free to contact us, and just have a good day, everyone. Take care.